Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the third part of What If Deku Had a Robot Wolf. I hope you enjoy. Link to the original story and author in the description. Chapter 3, Trainers. Once more, Izumi found herself in the waiting room of Isa Tsuneo, with her mother and Durandal beside her. They weren't the only ones there. There was an older woman there as well, with a young girl who was probably the same age as her sitting beside her. The younger girl had light dirty blonde tied into two messy buns and golden yellow cat-like eyes. She wore a school uniform, but it wasn't the same one Izumi wore. She was also shivering, but it didn't look like it was because she was cold. If anything, it looked like she was shivering in fear. Izumi couldn't help but watch as the other girl reached into a bag of red gummy sweets and pulled one out, handshaking as she brought the sweet up to her mouth, holding the sweet between her teeth as she brought her hand down before she ate it. She looked to calm down slightly as she ate it but still shivered. Izumi felt it might be best not to speak to her. She was stressed out, and talking to her might cause more damage. So she kept quiet, hoping that when she went to meet Dr. Isa, he could help her. A few minutes later, the door to Isa's office opened, and two people walked out. An older gentleman in a suit and a boy with short, wavy, light brown hair and a gas mask covering his face. He also had what looked like two air tanks on his back. As the two walked by, Izumi wondered why the boy had that equipment on him. She suspected it must have something to do with his quirk. Some quirks, unfortunately, made the person with them dangerous to be around, so they required special equipment to help them live a normal life. Maybe his quirk was gas-related and was dangerous to those around him, requiring him to carry those tanks to catch any gas he accidentally made. A few moments later, after the two had left the room, Isa poked his head out of the doorway. "Ah, Izumi. Please, do come in." Izumi was about to stand up before she looked back towards the other girl, who was still shivering. Actually, if it's okay, could she go before us?" she asked, getting a surprised look from the girl and the woman she was with. "Well, if that's okay with you, sure," Isa said before he looked towards the other girl, Miss Kubota. "You can bring Himiko in now." The older woman nodded before she stood up, helping the young girl to her feet before they walked towards Isa's office. "Thank you," the girl said quietly as they passed them and entered the office. Inko smiled as the two women walked into the office and closed the door before turning back towards her daughter. "That was very kind of you, Izumi." "She looked like she needed help more than I did," Izumi said. She looked close to breaking, a feeling she was all too familiar with. She wondered what had happened to that other girl to put her in such a state, but she felt asking would be a bad idea. Besides, like herself, she had Isa helping her, so she should be fine. Yes, the downside was that they would have to wait about half an hour before their session could start, but at least the other girl didn't have to sit around for half an hour before getting help. Inko smiled as she ruffled her daughter's hair. She was so proud of her, still pushing forwards despite all the terrible things that had happened to her. "So, now, what do we do?" Seeing that we have to wait half an hour for Izumi's appointment, Durandal asked. "Well, there is a small coffee shop not far from here," Inko replied. "We can wait there for a bit. Besides, even with this delay, we should be able to reach the beach in time." Izumi smiled as the three got up and walked out, telling Isa's secretary they would return in about half an hour as their appointment shifted. The coffee shop was only a 3-minute walk away. It wasn't a large place, but they'd been there before, and the food and drinks were lovely. It was also on the quiet side, with the only other customer being a short senile old man with a plate full of taiyaki. They spent the next 20 minutes there, enjoying a nice cup of tea and some donuts before heading back to his office, arriving back just in time to watch the woman and the young girl who had gone in before walk out. The young girl looked a lot better than she did before going in. Isa was still sitting down when the two walked in. "Ah, the Midoriyas. Good to see you again. That was very generous of you to allow Himiko to be seen before you," he said with a smile. Izumi nodded as she and Inko sat down, Durandal sitting down last so that he may rest his head on Izumi's lap. "Is she okay?" she asked, sounding worried. Isa nodded. "She's fine," he replied, although that was as much he could say about her. patient confidentiality and all that. Izumi let out a sigh of relief, glad that the other girl was alright. Their session continued as usual. They mainly focused on her nightmares of falling with no one to catch her. She hadn't been getting them as much as she used to, but she was still getting them. Waking her up in the middle of the night made it difficult to return to bed. He gave her some tips to try and get a better night's sleep, but said that she may still be having them for a while. Even after completing her therapy, she may still get them occasionally. He can only help her so much, and there will always be lingering damage from the incident. The rest of the session went well. She was thankful for these sessions, as they were helping her recover from the incident and building up some self-confidence after all the bullying she had been subjected to. Even so, there was still a lot of work to be done and many more sessions to attend. When the session finished, they went straight to Takoba Municipal Beach. Owing to the delay of their session, they didn't have much time to go home before they had to go to the beach to help clear it. Whilst Inko did want her daughter to get stronger for UA, she didn't want her to overdo it. She already had to stop her from exercising when she wasn't supposed to several times, even if she had some concerns with All Might's American Dream Plan. But, if her daughter was going to get one for all, she needed to get stronger. It was good that she was aware of this, as she could help keep Izumi in check. She hoped All Might could convince Sir Nighteye to teach her how to fight. She's going to need it if she gets into UA. Takoba Municipal Beach Park. All Might sat on one of the benches covering the trash-covered beach, sitting in his deflated form while waiting for his old sidekick, Sir Nighteye, to arrive. The beach before him was still a mess, but it was evident that someone was clearing it up. He was amazed by how much work she had been able to do in only 4 weeks. At this rate, she'll be more than ready to receive one for all by the time of the UA entrance exam. She did have Durandal and her mother helping her at times, but they were mainly removing the pieces so small that carrying them wouldn't help make her stronger. The problem was that strength wasn't all that was needed. She also needed to know how to fight and improve her analytical skills. Sir Nighteye could do both of those. It was just getting him to agree to do it that was the problem. Ever since they parted ways, he feared that Nighteye was looking for his own candidate to inherit one for all. Which was why he decided to deal with this before he met Izumi. So that he could talk some sense into the man. He didn't have to wait long before he saw his former sidekick walking towards him. His dark green hair with yellow streaks was unmissable. Sir Nighteye stopped a few feet from the bench All Might was sitting on. Both men stared at each other, eyes meeting as they stood in silence, neither one speaking until All Might decided to break the silence. Mirai, he said, using his former sidekick's name. Toshinori, Sir Nighteye replied, using All Might's real name. The two stood/sat silently for a moment before Mirai looked around. If you're looking for Izumi, she's not here. Not yet, anyway, Toshinori said as he stood and turned to face him. I wanted to make sure we had this discussion before she arrived. Worried that I might say something to her you wouldn't approve of? Mirai asked, fixing his glasses. Considering when I called you for help, you told me I was making a mistake and to consider your candidate instead. Yes, Toshinori replied with a frown. Why are you trying to get me to choose someone else anyway? One for all isn't yours to give away. It's mine. Just like it was Nana's choice to give it to me, so too is it my choice to give it to Izumi. Because I do not believe she is a suitable candidate to take on such a burden, Mirai replied with a frown. You said she had the drive to become a hero to save others, but you can't become a hero on intentions alone. There are far more capable candidates with the same intentions as Izumi who would make a far better successor than she would. Toshinori glared at his former sidekick with an aggressive look in his eyes. How can you say that about her? You haven't even met the girl yet. I know enough about her already, Mirai replied calmly. The police reports on her suicide attempt made for interesting reading. I will admit I am interested in her analytical skills. But, I do not believe she is a suitable candidate to receive one for all, let alone in a stable enough condition right now to even be coincide for it. You should know better than this, Toshinori, to choose a young, quirkless girl who tried to end her own life a month ago as your successor is a bad idea. His sentence was abruptly ended by Toshinori's fist punching him in the face, sending him flying backwards and rolling across the pavement before skidding to a stop. Mirai lay on the ground, frozen, his eyes wide in shock as he tried to register what had just happened to him. Toshinori had just punched him with what felt like a Detroit smash, and it did not take him long to realize just why he had punched him. He slowly rolled over onto his back, removed his now broken glasses, and quickly replaced them with an undamaged pair. He sat up, only to fall back onto his back when Toshinori landed in front of him in his muscular form, looking down at him with pure hatred in his eyes. Don't think I don't know what she's been through. Because I do. Toshinori fumed, glaring at his former sidekick as steam emanated from his body. Mirai remained frozen on the floor, a horrified look on his face. Do you want to know why I know what she's been through? Because I lived through the same thing. I wasn't always All Might. Once upon a time, I was once a young, quirkless boy who had been told time and time again that he could never be a hero, even by the heroes I looked up to. One day it was just too much for me to take, so I climbed to the top of the highest building I could find and jumped off. It was then that I met my mentor, Nana Shimura. She saved me, catching me as I fell and putting me down safely on the ground. Afterwards, I told her of my dream to create a world where everyone can smile and live happily together, to become a symbol of peace. She was the first person ever to tell me that I could achieve it, and she helped me and trained me to become the man I am today. She chose me as her successor. And when I was presented with the same situation, with a young girl who had been through the same shit as I have, asking me the same thing I asked Nana, I fucked it up. I told her that she couldn't become a hero and walked off. Just like that. It was because of my words that she jumped. If there hadn't been someone there to catch her, she wouldn't be alive, and her death would be on my conscience. Not as someone I failed to save, but as someone whose death I caused. This is me, making up for my mistake. Even if she had refused One for All and wanted to remain quirkless, I would still be trying to help her achieve her dream of becoming a hero. Because I owe it to her. He shouted before he reverted to his deflated form and collapsed onto the floor, blood spewing from his mouth. Mirai could only lay there, frozen in fear, with his eyes and mouth wide open as he took in what All Might had told him. It was shocking to believe that All Might, no, Toshinori, had once tried to end his own life because people constantly told him he could never become a hero. And Izumi was like him, a young girl with a dream who those around her had constantly pulled down. The only difference between them was that she was told she couldn't become a hero by the one man she looked up to, with almost horrific results. Pure, blind luck was the only reason she was still alive. Now he knew why Toshinori was so protective of the girl, why he was so determined to help her achieve her dream despite her mental state. She was like him once, a young child with a crushed dream willing to end it all. The only difference was that Toshinori messed up and was now making amends for his mistake. Toshinori finished coughing up blood before he looked up and glared at Mirai. Here is what we are going to do. He growled, either you help me to train her to become the best hero she can be. Or you leave, now. And never come anywhere near her. Understood, Mirai? Mirai sat in silence, breathing heavily, too scared to say anything, as Toshinori glared at him angrily, making the former sidekick feel like he was staring down the devil himself. He had only seen him this angry one time before, and that was during his battle against All for One. He lowered his head in shame. He was a fool to think he could change Toshinori's mind and think he could find a better successor to receive One for All. There was no changing Toshinori's mind. He had chosen Izumi as his successor to inherit One for All. There would be no changing his mind and no changing the future he foresaw the last time they met. I'll help her, Mirai said, head still lowered in shame. I know it will be impossible to make you change your mind, so I'll help you train her. It's as you said, she needs more than just strength to make it into UA. Toshinori nodded before he stood up. Good. Glad you're finally seeing some sense, he growled, offering up his hand to help Mirai back onto his feet. Mirai was hesitant to take Toshinori, mainly because it was the same hand that had, moments ago, been used to punch him in the face. Hesitantly he reached forwards and took Toshinori's hand, the skeletal man helping him back onto his feet. "Apologies for punching you in the face," Toshinori said. "But as Gran Torino used to say, I needed to beat some sense into you." Mirai nodded cautiously before the two men looked around. "You didn't tell him about Izumi, did you?" Toshinori asked nervously as he looked for signs that his old teacher was around. Mirai shook his head. "I'm not that cruel, Toshinori. She's not ready for his teaching." "No one is," he replied nervously, having bad memories of the last time he met All Might's mentor. His head felt lopsided after the last time he spent with the old man. "We're going to have to tell him at some point," Mirai added. Toshinori nodded in agreement. He would have to inform the old man that he was passing one for all to someone, and he no doubt would want to meet the girl. He'd probably have a few things to say about his training methods Dibs not telling him. Toshinori glared at Mirai with an unhappy look. "I'm still pissed off at you, you know." "Hey, I agreed to help train her, not inform Gran Torino about her," Mirai said. "That's your job." Toshinori continued to glare at Mirai, unhappy with his former sidekick. "Fine. Just promise me you won't use your quirk on her, understand?" Mirai nodded, not wanting to be punched in the face again by Toshinori. "Don't worry, I won't." "So, when do I get to meet Izumi?" "She should be here in about 10 minutes, Toshinori replied. "I suggest you clean yourself off. Izumi might get worried if you look like that." "I'd rather not make it look like we disagreed." Mirai nodded once more before he brushed himself off. Good thing his suit was made from strong stuff and wasn't damaged easily. Otherwise, he'll go through about 4 of them a week. Once he had finished dusting himself off, the two men sat in silence, waiting for the Midoriyas to arrive. Toshinori didn't see much of a reason to talk to his former sidekick unless it was necessary. He was still unhappy with him. Mirai meanwhile decided that it was probably best that he didn't speak until Izumi arrived since he's made quite a mess of this. Toshinori was furious with him right now. If anything, they used the time to cool down before she arrived. 12 minutes later, they heard footsteps approaching them. The two looked up to see Izumi, Inko, and Durandal walking up to the path to the beach. When the three spotted them, Izumi froze on the spot, probably because she saw All Might sitting next to Sir Nighteye, something that hadn't happened for the past 5 years since the two went their separate ways. Several moments later, she zipped over to them, a bright smile on her face. "Sir Nighteye's here. I didn't think I'll ever see you two together again since you parted ways," she said happily before she bowed and presented him with one of her notebooks. "Can I have your autograph, please?" Mirai was taken slightly aback by the young girl's enthusiasm. Toshinori had told him that she was a hero fan as well as a massive All Might fan, but he didn't think she was this much of a fan. "Sure," he said calmly as he took the notebook and opened it up. He wasn't surprised when he opened it up to his page in the book, with a surprisingly good drawing of him in his hero costume. What did surprise him, however, was the rather detailed analysis of his quirk and fighting style. Almost a full page of information about his quirk and several questions about it, like how it worked, what he could do with it, and what its limitations may be. Some of them were questions that took him years to ask himself. He quickly looked at a few of the other pages in the notebook, and sure enough, each page had an equally detailed analysis of the hero's quirk. It was imperfect, a mess of unorganized notes, questions and facts, but what was there was highly detailed. And with the right training, it could become something great. He was starting to regret thinking so negatively of her. She was a smart kid, and with the power of One for All, she would become a terrifying foe to face. Good thing she wanted to become a hero. With analytical skills like this, she could easily become a dangerous villain. He returned the notebook to her after he finished signing it. She looked at the page with eager eyes before she noticed, with a surprised look, that he had not only signed the page but had also answered all her questions about his quirk and had given her a review of her analytical skill and formatting. "You weren't kidding about her analytical skill," Mirai remarked. "It's not professional yet, but what is there is impressive." It normally takes decades for someone to develop that level of analysis skill. Toshinori smiled, but only slightly. As I said, she likes analyzing people's quirks, he said before turning back towards Izumi. Now, Izumi, Sir Nighteye has agreed to help train you. He's going to focus on teaching you how to fight and to improve your analytical skills. Izumi looked up at Toshinori, still with a surprised look on her face. Sir Nighteye's going to help teach me? She said as the smile on her face grew. Toshinori nodded, but he realized that was probably a bad idea, as no sooner had he nodded, Izumi was rushing about, screaming with excitement. I'll take it that this is a dream come true for her? Mirai asked, getting a nod from Toshinori. Give her a minute or two to calm down, Toshinori said as they, as well as Inko and Durandal, waited for Izumi to calm down a bit so they could get back to training. It took a bit longer than expected for Izumi to calm down, but eventually, she stopped celebrating and hopped back over to them. So, when does Sir Nighteye start teaching me? She asked with a smile. Not today, I'm afraid, Mirai replied as he fixed his glasses. I'll need time to go over All Might's training program for you to find time for me to train you. Plus, I am busy with hero work. Unlike All Might, I can't spend all my time helping you. Don't worry, I can send you some coursework to help with your analytical skills. So you should be fine on that end. Izumi nodded. Thank you, Sir Nighteye, she said, slightly disappointed that Sir Nighteye couldn't start teaching her immediately, but this was probably to be expected. He was busy, after all. He couldn't be helping her all the time. But the mere thought of having the number one hero and his old sidekick helping to train her excited her. It was like a dream come true. Can I just ask one small question? Mirai sighed. No, I am not going to use my quirk on you just so you can find out if you pass the UA entrance exam, he said as Toshinori facepalmed. The one thing he didn't take into consideration, Izumi asking him to use his quirk on her. Izumi looked at him with a surprised look on her face. How did you know that I was going to ask that? Because you're not the first person to ask me that, Mirai replied. Many of my old classmates tried to get me to see into their futures to see if they would pass the next exam. Or to get the answers from the teacher. I, of course, told them no, and to study. Except for that one time when I did give them the right answers but to the wrong test. Now that was hilarious and got them to leave me alone. Oh, Izumi said, sounding disappointed, but it was probably for the best. Learning that she would get into UA might make her overconfident and end up doing something stupid. You should start your training now, Izumi. You aren't going to get stronger by sitting around, Toshinori recommended. Izumi nodded before she put on her gloves and went to work carrying the trash that littered the beach towards the truck. Durandal followed her about, not helping her unless something needed breaking up, as some things on the beach were just too big for her to move, like a bunch of very large combat robots, tanks, aircraft, and the remains of a ship. Why is there so much military ordnance on this beach? Izumi asked as she dragged the barrel of a tank towards the truck. You'd think the JSDF would clean all this stuff up. They're all Paxton's machines, even the vehicles, Durandal replied as he walked beside her. AI-controlled transport aircraft that were involved in his attack on Japan that never made it ashore, shot down by the JSDF. Dumping their metal cargo into the sea only for it to be washed up here. You don't have to worry about unexploded ordnance. All of Paxton's machines of war used energy weapons. And their reactors have long since become non-functional, meaning it should be safe for you to remove them. Well, that's a relief, Izumi remarked as she dragged the barrel into the back of the truck. At least I don't risk getting sick from all of this. Why did Paxton use an army of robots anyway? Wouldn't a large army of people with quirks suffice? Robots can be manufactured quickly, especially combat robots, Durandal replied as the two walked back to the pile of trash. Paxton wanted an army, a large one. Humans are good, but it takes decades to get them into a state where they can be trained to fight. An army of robots can be programmed and assembled in a week, ready for war far sooner than a human can. Plus, you don't have to feed them. Looks like I'm going to have to research your creator a bit, Izumi said as she got ready to drag the tank treads. I don't know much about the man. I was only 4 when he showed up and started his war. All my mother said about it was that she was praying, hoping he wouldn't bring his war here. Good thing the JDSF dealt with most of his robot army before they reached Japan. Shame the same can't be said about the rest of the world, she said, laminating the destruction the man had caused. So many lives lost, so much death and destruction, for what? What did he accomplish? Nothing. What the hell was his end goal anyway, causing widespread death and destruction for no reason? It was because men like him existed that she wanted to become a hero. I won't lie. Paxton was a genius when it came to robotics, Durandal said as Izumi dragged the treads. His machines were far more advanced than anything else in the world, and he was the first to make a positronic brain successfully. He could have done so much good for the world. Just a shame he used his machines for evil. This body I inhabit is one of his machines, as am I one of his creations. And whilst I am not happy with this current arrangement, at least this way I can shit all over my creator's work and do the opposite of what he did. You could just say save people, Izumi said. Yeah, that too. Izumi sighed as she continued to work. Durandal, whilst he could be a bit of a sociopath at times, was making strides not to become another one of Paxton's weapons of war. As Izumi worked, Inko and Mirai sat on a bench, whilst Toshinori watched over her, ensuring she wasn't overexerting herself. The two sat there for a while before Mirai stood up and started to walk off. Leaving already? Inko asked, sounding concerned. Mirai stopped before turning back towards her. I can't be here all the time, I have work to do. Don't worry, I won't forget to help train your daughter. I'll send her a few things to help improve her analytical skill. They're quite impressive, by the way, a bit disorganized, but she already has the making to become a great quirk analyst. Teaching her how to fight will be difficult, and I won't have much time to train her. But I think I can get one of my sidekicks to help her out. That's good to hear, Inko said with a slight smile. But, I must warn you. If you do anything to harm my daughter or try to dissuade her from receiving one for all, then consider your testiculate privileges revoked. Mirai had to take a double take just to be sure he heard her right. You are aware that I'm a pro-hero who was once All Might's sidekick, right? And I'm an overprotective mother whose daughter had spent the past 10 years getting bullied for being quirkless and tried to end her own life a month ago, Inko replied with a rather intimidating frown on her face. Who was also absolutely done with All Might. The only reason why I'm allowing him to train Izumi and pass on his quirk to her is because, after all the shit my daughter has been through, he is the first person who apologized for what he did to her and is trying to make amends for what he did. Mirai nodded, fearing for the safety of his private parts. Whilst he no doubt could efficiently deal with the woman, something about how Inko blared at him made him feel that she was capable of carrying out her threat but had also carried out said threat before. A part of him was glad that Toshinori had knocked some sense into him because, whilst Inko looked unassuming, she could be downright terrifying at times. Especially when it concerned her little cinnamon roll Izumi. Don't worry, I'll make sure that she doesn't come to any harm whilst she's being taught how to fight, Mirai said, placating Inko. Hopefully. Inko smiled, letting All Might's former sidekick turn to leave with his privates still intact. Glad that her daughter was receiving help from someone other than All Might. He was good at teaching someone to get stronger, but to fight, that was debatable. As Mirai walked away, he turned back to see Toshinori encouraging Izumi. Well, he thought to himself, at least he'll have someone who cares about him when the end comes. Later that day, somewhere secluded in a forest. Damn it, Hitoshi cursed as the mock capture tape failed to ensnare the target. Using binding cloth was hard, even when you had to make it from scratch. He had done a bit more research into Eraserhead, although there wasn't much on the man. As Izumi had said, he was an underground hero, and there normally isn't much publicly available about them. He was so unknown that Izumi had forgotten that she had an entry on the guy. Sadly, she had more info about his quirk than his binding cloth, only knowing that he was the only known user of it and that it could be used by someone quirkless. He probably had to train himself to use it as well. makes sense considering the man's quirk. He effectively makes his enemies quirkless as well. Well, there was also the underground hero Jade. She was reportedly very good with a whip, so good that she could dual wield them, but no one had seen her in over a decade, and Hitoshi didn't see himself becoming Indiana Jones anytime soon. Also, who the fuck dual wield whips? Since there was nothing he could do to improve his quirk, not without using it on someone. That was a recipe for disaster. He instead focused on training his body and working to master a weapon that had only one known user and was a bitch to use. He didn't have proper binding cloth on him since he had no idea how to acquire the stuff. So he made a substitute out of duct tape. It wasn't like the real thing but made for a suitable substitute. Well, he thought it would anyway. It turns out a long strip of tape taped to another long strip of tape doesn't make a suitable substitute for a cloth made from carbon fibers. Oh well, it'll work for now, hopefully. Nito was having a bit more luck in training his quirk. Izumi's advice to him had been helpful. He could copy someone's quirk from a lock of their hair that wasn't attached to them. This allowed him to keep using the person's quirk for a lot longer than 5 minutes, as long as he kept holding on to the hair. Now he was testing to see how long the strands of hair had to be off the person's head before he could no longer copy their quirk from the hair. Both of them had been hitting the gym to help build some muscle mass and strengthen. Izumi had said she was doing the same, but they never saw her at the gym they went to. But she did say that she had her own training program, so she was probably going to a different gym. If there was one thing Izumi was right about, he needed a fighting style that complemented his quirk, which was probably why he was interested in Eraserhead. Their quirks were somewhat similar. Very useful for hero work too, but absolutely shit when up against robots or someone who's immune to it, especially in his case, because he needed the target to respond to him. Hopefully, binding cloth would make a suitable weapon for him if he could master it. He had set some mock targets up on a fallen log in a secluded part of the forest. A few bottles of water and a packet of salty licorice, and for the past half hour, had been trying to lasso the tape around them without much success. This was a lot harder than it looked in the one video he found of Eraserhead using his binding cloth. He made it look easy. He sighed as he pulled the tape back and prepared to throw it again, this time targeting the packet of salty licorice. So far, he hadn't been successful in grabbing any of the targets, but he had been getting closer and closer to them. Hopefully, this time he'll be able to grab the target. He reeled back and threw the tape forwards towards the licorice, the loop just managing to wrap around the package. Hitoshi looked at the package with surprised eyes before smiling. Okay, he had successfully managed to ensnare something. He wasn't close to mastering the weapon, but he was getting there. He tugged back on the tape, pulling the package towards him. But as the package fell off the log, a gray piece of fabric came out of nowhere, ensnared the licorice package, and pulled it away. He froze on the spot, shocked by what had just happened. Someone else had just ensnared the licorice package and pulled it away just as he pulled it back. But who would do that? He heard the distinct sound of a plastic package being opened to his side. He quickly looked towards the source of the noise and was shocked by what he saw. A man was standing on the branch of a nearby tree. He had shoulder-length black hair and wore a baggy black outfit with his trousers tucked into his boots. A pair of bright yellow goggles covered his eyes, and his neck and the lower part of his face were covered by a long strip of gray cloth wrapped around him. He was holding the now open packet of licorice in one hand. All the while, the man looked down at him from his vantage point. "You know, kid," the man said as he reached into the bag of licorice, pulling out one of the pieces of black licorice. "Double-sided tape doesn't make for a great capture weapon. That will be it for this part. I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and comment if you want part 4. If you want to hear more from me, subscribe. I hope to see you all in the next one.